Is UCLA a top 4 team in the country, top 20 team in the country, overrated heading into next year? Well, I think Mick Cronin seems going to be good. But how good? Let's discuss it.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer, longtime host of the Locked On UCLA Podcast, broadcaster, a little bit of a baseball coach, a little bit of everything here at Locked On UCLA, which is why we thank you for coming to this episode of Locked On UCLA, making this your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, download. Thanks for your support. Welcome back, everydayers. Today, we're talking about the confusing thing. Is UCLA top 5? Are they top 15/20? Are they overrated heading into this year? And what's Mick Cronin's impact been felt at UCLA and his absence at Cincinnati, while we recap UCLA's thrilling opening Big Ten Conference Tournament game? All that and more on this episode. So what are we talking about? The expectations for this team. The Bruins, we already know, have no doubt skyrocketed expectations from last year's team. The Bruins had the quote-unquote, I believe Ben Bolch of the LA Times called them the quick fix 6 for last year's team in the transfer portal. Most of those guys stayed. UCLA has no incoming high school recruits, so what Mick Cronin did was go to the portal, grab a bunch of talent, with the most significant addition being Donovan Dent. They have some interesting prospects at the center position, but a lot of it is based on the returners, how Mick Cronin can utilize the Eric Daly Jr., Tyler Bilodeau lineup together while not going small against some of the other teams in the conference, in the Big Ten, in the non-conference, to be a team that John Rothstein thinks is a top 4, or in his case now a top 5 team, because his top 45, John Rothstein's, actually shifted. UCLA for almost 2 months now has been a top 4 team in the country for John Rothstein of CBS Sports with his top 45, and they shifted to number 5. Is that something the recruiting's done? Anything's happened? Well, Florida, the defending national champion, as much as their roster has turned over, moved to number 4 because Boogie Flan committed to go to Florida. So UCLA dropped a spot. So they're still significantly viewed in the eyes of John Rothstein, who's been very high on the impact of Donovan Dent. And that cannot be understated, as much as I've said on this podcast. Since he's become a Bruin, since he's transferred from New Mexico, this is a guy that is going to give UCLA everything and that much more since Tiger Campbell in many different ways. As much as their shortcomings at center will be a problem, they can still mask it with what Mick Cronin's been able to do with his Final Four team, what teams he's been successful with in Cincinnati. He's just got to put the pieces together. Now, the other funny thing is I was looking at Joe Lunardi's bracketology. Yes, he does bracketology after the season's done, deep into the spring and late into the summer, although a lot less consistent in terms of when he posts them. But Joe Lunardi just the other day posted his second off-season bracketology. So you got one thinking UCLA's top 5. I've been on the record thinking a little bit of a big gamble to put UCLA top 5 in this early of the season, but I can believe that they're top 15. The Bruins, though, according to Joe Lunardi's bracketology, are currently in the West, which would be housed in San Jose this next tournament season. They would be the 4 seed, not number 4 in the country, but the 4 seed in their own Western regional, which I think would be fine because one of the host sites would be San Diego. That's Viejas Arena, host of the San Diego State Aztecs. So if UCLA could get a first weekend regional in San Diego, play in San Jose, and then all of a sudden, hey, by the way, UCLA could be a lot closer to home than going to Lexington, having to travel this year, or this upcoming season, I should say. The regionals are as close as ever. You go to San Diego, you take a quick flight to San Jose. That's important for the Bruins. And if you want to kind of compare the schedules for UCLA, the Big Ten, way too early bracketology, has 11 teams from the Big Ten in it, 11 making the NCAA tournament. Arizona, who they just officially announced will play UCLA at the Intuit Dome. We've already talked about that with John Rothstein's reporting, but they will play at the Intuit Dome, and that will be a game to honor Bill Walton. The Bruins, again, against Gonzaga. Arizona's listed as a 2 seed. Gonzaga is listed as a 6 seed. You've got Purdue, who's listed as one of the 4-1 seeds. Heck, even USC is a top 5 seed in their own region, not top 5 seed overall. That still means You're expecting USC with the year-to-year turnover to be a top 20 team. You've got a non-conference game early in the season where Arizona is supposed to be a top 8 team in the country against a UCLA team that's either viewed better than they are or just in the same wavelength in the top 15. And Purdue is the clear favorite right now in the Big Ten with what they've been able to add. And let's not forget some of the other teams that have made some additions in the Big Ten as well. Where does UCLA rank? Why is it so back and forth? A lot of it is going to be looked at UCLA's loss of Adai Mara and what can be made from Xavier Booker, Steven Jamerson, all right? And the Bruins have gotten different pieces in the portal, but a lot of it will be Jamerson and Booker and how much Cronin goes small. And this will be one of those years where Cronin's going to have to coach. Not that he hasn't had to coach before, but this is a team with even more expectations, and I've already detailed those as well, with what he's brought in the NIL, $3 million of sorts to Donovan Dent. And if you believe the reports, Washington brought in Great Osabor, who started at Montana State, went to Utah State with Sprinkle, and then brought him to Washington for $2 million. And they were in one of the worst spots in the Big Ten. All right. So UCLA and their $3 million commitment, according to reports, that they're giving to Donovan Dent, maybe that's not so bad. For a team that is expected to make the tournament, anything short would be a glaring red flag on Cronin's record. I don't think that's the case, and that's not what Cronin's going to do in this season. The problem is, how can Cronin, maybe not the problem, the detail for Cronin this season, how can he make this team go from a top 16 team to a team that makes it to the Final Four? That's the next step for this Bruins program, since they'll be 5 years removed from the Final Four run of Mick Cronin's undertaking in 2021 by the next time this tournament starts. All right. And it won't be a COVID-affected one. It'll be one obviously with fans well beyond COVID. Maybe they'll have detailed what the NIL will look like, how many years of eligibility it'll look like in the future for these athletes. But it just back and forth. Are they a top 5 team? Are they a team in the top 15? And there's a bunch of teams ahead of them in the Big Ten or in their non-conference schedule that can present opportunities for the Bruins to prove themselves? Yes. Or is Donovan Dent just the man? And as we saw with Florida, their man just carried them to a national championship. Although he was at Florida for a couple of seasons, UCLA will need a lot out of Dent. Big expectations for a new arrival that has not played under Coach Cronin. All right. How that relationship works immediately could determine how good the seeding that the Bruins will get in March. How quickly that Dent-Cronin relationship works. In addition to the center. Because I think we have a good idea of what Bilodeau is going to do, what Daly's going to do. Sky Clark, I think, was just peaking at the right time once the tournament came around in the second round, if he wasn't in foul trouble against Tennessee. We know what some of these players can do, and I'm expecting and hoping for some growth from the likes of the Red Shirts, from Trent Perry. It's just, where can UCLA get ahead on the margins, like a Jamar Brown, who could help immensely rebounding, defensively, even shooting the basketball, if he can make the strides needed from the Summit League to the Big Ten. And I think the gap has been closing more and more with the players who have been consistently transferring, even if they start in JUCO and find themselves in the Big Ten by the time their career's done. That's where Cronin's job and his coaching staff had the job of, hey, this kid's not that far behind. A little bit of coaching, he's right there, one last opportunity. The teams that win championships, they have the mix of the youth, which I was detailing that Cronin needs to get in his next recruiting class, but they're also very, very, very old and talented, have played lots of years of college basketball at various levels, right? And Cronin has got a lot of that on this team with no incoming freshmen at the moment, although that could change at any time with craziness late in the offseason. They're slightly young with a lot of veteran pieces in the starting lineup. I, again, will say this is a top 15 team, and they've got to prove it against an Arizona that will be top 8 in a neutral site matchup for the Bruins in Los Angeles at the Clippers Arena at the Intuit Dome. When they get to play Gonzaga up in Seattle, as long as they don't slip against the projected game against Cal later in the year when they play in NorCal. And then navigating this Big Ten schedule and not complaining about the travel, but getting the job done. I say top 15, despite UCLA being a 4 seed in their own regional. I hope that's a lot better for UCLA, but as long as they stay location-wise on the West, that's still the most important thing for UCLA going on a run in the NCAA tournament, considering the travel they will have to do in the back half of their schedule that they're avoiding starting in their non-conference. Next, though, what's Mick Cronin's impact? All right, maybe not necessarily in this team. And I know it seems like a lot of you guys think I'm a big-time hater of Mick Cronin. I don't think that's fully the case, even that might be even presented a little bit different here. UCLA, they got Mick Cronin. What do they have, and what has been lost when Cronin has been brought to UCLA for Cincinnati? Let's kind of compare where those programs have gone next on Locked On UCLA. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night they deliver highlight-worthy performances. The playoffs are better than ever, and with major momentum shifts now in the conference final moments, they just can't miss. Game-winning shots, breakout players, there's never been a better time to get in on the action, and FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the game and stay in on the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, same-game parlays with FanDuel, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Think about it. You've got, SGA, who's now reportedly won the MVP, had a big-time performance in Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals. Now, is Anthony Edwards going to come back and have more fourth-quarter points than SGA? Well, that's something you can go check out with your player props in certain situations. And hey, Jalen Brunson, New York, with all their fan base, as rabid as it is, do you think they're going to beat the Pacers in a rematch of 90s rivalry playoff basketball? Well, go check that out and see who's hitting up and back it up with the same game parlay. Think about this $200 bonus you can get by winning your first $5 bet. It's new to FanDuel. If you're new to FanDuel, perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet, and if you win, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Cruising on into the second segment for the Locked On UCLA, we're talking more UCLA basketball, centering more on Mick Cronin. I know I got seems like the marker of a hater on Mick Cronin. I don't think that's the case. I have to be critical in certain situations where there's been a lack of high school recruiting. And obviously there's the big situation earlier this year where he was very critical of his players, very critical. And I thought I'd put out some analysis how the numbers actually back up how powerful the Bruins are after Cronin goes on post-game rants. They're almost always immediately successful and have good years or better years after a Cronin rant. And that's exactly what happens, give it a game or two, after the Michigan game for the UCLA Bruins this year. So he knows what he does. His antics will drive some crazy, especially in the fan base. And I do believe there is a growing number in the UCLA fan base that are starting to turn on Mick Cronin. All right. I'm not full board. Let's fire Mick Cronin. That's not my thought. But I do think there's a seat that's slightly warming. And I have to acknowledge that. If UCLA does not meet expectations this season with no high school recruits next year, that would be a recipe for disaster. I don't think that's where UCLA's headed. But there's a reason to talk about concern and critics while also realizing, Cronin has done some big things. And I have always been of the opinion, a healthy UCLA team a couple seasons ago, and you don't even hear the name UConn. If UCLA has Jalen Clark healthy, if they have a Dembona healthy, we're not talking about Danny Hurley being the biggest knucklehead in basketball and him being the greatest coach right now as much as you want. No. Mick Cronin had his team better, playing better defense. I am of the hot take opinion the Bruins would have given the Huskies a run for their money in the Elite Eight with a team that was as good as Mick Cronin's ever had. And it's taken a couple of miracle shots, a couple of heartbreaking injuries to keep the Bruins short from Mick Cronin adding to the UCLA legacy. I'm not going to say better, but he's certainly added to the legacy and brought the Bruins into a new era, past COVID, prior to COVID, from the Steve Alford era, where, yes, there's a little more excitement for Alford coming from Howland. There was some top upsets, some super filled Pauley Pavilion moments when you see Oregon in town, when you saw Kentucky in town, dunks, excitement. But Alford never got to the mini pinnacle that Howland and Cronin had been to, which was the Final Four and on the precipice of winning a national championship for the Bruins for the first time for Howland's time, 20 years, for Cronin for the first time for UCLA, nearly 30 years, while moving UCLA into a new day and age. All right. Cronin has been very successful at updating and being close to the fan base with, hey, he tells the media what he thinks. He tells you all that he thinks about all his players, pretty much. He's very blunt. He'll say, hey, by the way, our NIL situation is not good. And now here you are a couple years later, and most likely your favorite newest Bruin is going to be a guy that is making $3 million in NIL opportunities. Whether that drives you crazy, whether it doesn't, maybe you're like, it's transfers. Every single team in the country has transfers. I acknowledge it's tough to root for a team that's got transfers. But that's not just UCLA. That's every team in the country that's got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe more. Some teams less, some teams a lot more continuity. But think about the Bruins that have quite a bit of continuity this year. Outside of the new guys coming in, you got guys with a year of experience, couple years redshirt, in fact. And Cronin's been able to keep some of these young guys who, even if they redshirted, like the Eric Freeneys and the Brandon Williams of the world, they're in their second, third year of the program, even if we hadn't heard their name in quite some time. And we can't forget to acknowledge Cronin always talks about his Cincinnati days, being a disciple of Bob Huggins, all right? So Cronin did get to take over for Huggins at Cincinnati. If you forget those mid-2000s years before the 2010s, Cincinnati was doing good. But then Bob Huggins was no longer the coach. They had to transition. And there was a slow transition to Mick Cronin. But then Cronin had Cincinnati playing really well. Maybe not as the heights of Bob Huggins was in his Cincinnati tenure, heading into the new century, new millennium. But Mick Cronin had Cincinnati making the tournament. You know when Cincinnati's last NCAA tournament appearance was? Let's think about that. Cincinnati has not made it to the tournament since 2019. When was that last Mick Cronin year? 2019. And yes, you can make the argument. Obviously, Cincinnati, they were, I believe, an American, transitioned into the Big 12. Is that a university? Is that a fan base that's prepared to shell out NIL financial commitments like teams in the AAC were then, or definitely anywhere near the Big 12? No. But it's not like UCLA was anywhere near those commitments, despite the 4 letters, despite all the big branding. And I would be convinced Mick Cronin could go get some NIL funding at Cincinnati too, in addition to what he did at UCLA. But it's clear, Cincinnati did have a good year during the COVID shutdown year in the pandemic, where it was UCLA was borderline tournament. I believe Cincinnati would have made that tournament too in the 1920. But since where we are just entering this super transfer era, the extra eligibility that we're still pulling out of, it might still turn into a 5th year, and the NIL era, Cronin has pulled UCLA into a new wave in a positive way. While still making some enemies and being loud to the media, he's brought the Bruins through a tough period, overhauled the program, made them a much tougher team, and went from a program that was tough-nosed and made UCLA a lot tougher, which I just don't think they were during Steve Alford's era. Sweet 16, cool. While the Bruins have suffered some early defeats in heartbreaking ways in recent years, including a beat down to Tennessee in the second round, he tends to get the most out of his players, whether it's Cincinnati or UCLA. And the effect has been clear as much as, yes, conference reaffiliation, conference changing and everything, realignment. And Cincinnati's probably taken it for the worst if they're not in a basketball conference like they were at the Big East and going more football heavy into the Big 12 potentially, which is a great basketball conference. And how with Arizona, the legends of Kansas and everything else, with Houston right now on the verge of winning a national championship. That is no easy conference to win in. But Cronin always likes to say, I was in the Big East, and I did pretty well the year that UConn won it, and UConn was near the middle of the pack or closer to the bottom of that conference before Kemba Walker went on a big run, all right? So he knew how to coach in a big conference, and I think you would have Cincinnati moved into this new day and age that has not made the tournament. A team that was pretty successful with Cronin after they had to come off a unique Huggins scandal where he was asked to leave. They had interim head coach, made it to the NIT, a couple of rough years to start for Cronin, and then they were a perennial tournament team under Mick Cronin. And what's UCLA generally been? A perennial tournament team that plays great defense. And while we might be worried that they're turning into the Ben Howland Bruins 2.0 with less Final Fours, this is a big upcoming couple of years for Cronin to turn the page, get that elusive national championship, win in a new conference that's definitely better top to bottom than the Pac-12 was, especially at the end. While navigating travel and NIL and all sorts of obstacles ahead his way, he's brought the Bruins forward, and we've seen Cincinnati not do as well. You can argue many different things as to why Cincinnati has not been good, but it's been, over a couple thousand days since the Bearcats have been to the NCAA tournament? Maybe they're asking for Cronin. We shouldn't be saying too many mean words to the guy that says, hey, he's moved the Bruins so much further. But there will be evaluation after this season, good or bad, in addition to how are the Bruins setting themselves up for the future, which is tougher to do with ongoing flipping commitments, ongoing decommitments, and endless transfers. Setting yourself up for the future is very tough to do. And Cronin's done quite a job for UCLA so far. And we'll see what that means in the next season or two, if that means good things or if the Bruins have to look to another guy to lead their program to their first national championship since the mid-90s. Speaking of a team that's been able to work themselves into a new Big Ten era pretty successfully already, UCLA, the co-Big Ten champs, had their first Big Ten tournament game. And what happened? We'll tell you about it next. A little controversy for John Savage's club, but they might have booked themselves a chance to get to the Big Ten semis with only one game played. How? Let's talk about it next on Locked On UCLA. Yes, we continue this Locked On UCLA episode. Zach still with you guys. We're talking baseball. The UCLA baseball team in the midst of a Big Ten tournament run. One game in, and they're already in the semifinals. How, Zach? How? Well, it's because they beat Illinois 8-6. And why does one game against the 11th place team dictate that the Bruins, who still have another pool play game in hand, get to go the next round? Well, Illinois and Michigan, UCLA's two other pool rivals, if you will, the 7th seed and the 11th seed, with the Bruins being the 2 seed, played on, Tuesday now? Illinois beat Michigan. So UCLA only has to come into a 3-way tie, which means all 3 teams went 1-1 to advance as the higher seed. That's the tiebreaker. No run differential, nothing. It's UCLA needed to beat Illinois. If Illinois won, they'd be 2-0, they'd advanced, and the Bruins would be playing a meaningless RPI game against Michigan. So a huge game for the Bruins not to drop, which could impact their seeding and their hosting ability in the first round. And the fact that all they have to do is win one game without maybe needing to overuse their bullpen, that would have been good, right? Well, in this game, UCLA won 8-6, a controversial call going their way in the 3rd inning. We'll talk about that in a moment. And yet the Bruins used 9 pitchers. I think some of that by design for John Savage, and some of that's a little, that's crazy. Only Ian May went 40 or more pitches. You had Cal Randall, who got 5 outs, 4 Ks. He threw 35 pitches. Pretty successful there. And then everybody else threw around 20 pitches or less, usually hovering around less. So a lot of available arms for the Bruins to use against Michigan, which is now, other than RPI and for seeding purposes and for a resume, it's meaningless for the Bruins. They don't have to overuse anybody. They have a day off, and then they're in the semifinals. So UCLA wins at 8-6. So this controversial play I'm talking about, it was a very unique play. I remember flipping on the channel, Big Ten Network. You're in the bottom of the 3rd. You're like, wow, UCLA's losing to Illinois 2-1. Well, Illinois had a winning record. The Bruins did sweep them in Champaign, but a lot of those games were pretty close against the Fighting Illini. A win for the Bruins meant berth to the semifinals. It meant 40 wins on the year. And then they wouldn't have to overall use many guys against Michigan, who the Bruins have already crushed by like 17 runs earlier in the season. Bottom 3, the Bruins had a couple of runners on, 2 outs, ground ball, hit up the middle, and there was a close bang-bang play at second base. Well, Rock Chalowski, who's generally in the middle of everything, who was the Big Ten Player of the Year, a highly coveted prospect of the 2026 MLB draft. Everybody's starting the hype machine a year early, hoping the Bruins make it. And everybody's like, wait a minute, Big Ten Player of the Year. Who is this guy? Well, he beat the throw to second base, like clearly, very clearly, and then ran off the bag. And in one motion, the Illinois infielder turned and swiped and tagged the leg of Chalowski right as he came off the back. That is clear as day. He kept running. But the umpire had called him out at second base, I think on the force out. And while Chalowski kept running, believing he was safe, he did not slide into the back. He kept running, ran off the base, got tagged out. They went, reviewed it. I think they went to video replay. And despite Chalowski being clearly tagged, like clearly out, he beat the throw, but he ran off the base. The ruling was because he was safe and that the Bruins runners were still running after the play, that every base runner was safe. First, second, and third bases loaded in what would have been an inning-ending play. Inning-ending play, it's what ended the Illinois season, unfortunately, and their potential dream run to an NCAA tournament, because he was technically incorrectly called out before being safe. So then, while he overran the base, that didn't mean anything, even though he was in the vicinity of the bag. Normally, like, oh, you keep going. No. We see too many of these plays where you look at the NBA and you're like, oh, they missed this, but before the missed call, the ball rolled out of bounds, last touched off somebody. The play was dead, at least in this college baseball ruling, even though it was a bang-bang play. I didn't think it made a difference. He should have been out, in my perspective, regardless of how the ruling officially worked. But that was a controversial call at second base that loaded the bases for the Bruins. And with them trailing 2-1, it was a walked-in run, I think another wild pitch, a misplayed ball that could have been out 2, and the wind aided the ball out number 3, aided the ball over the center fielder's head, and made the Bruins the front runners in this game 5-1. When they were 5-2, they were trailing 2-0 heading into the bottom of the third, had scratched one across, and then found themselves up 5-2, all with this 2-out rally on a controversial call at second base. If you want to go look at it, go look at the social media reviews, and maybe I didn't explain it as good. I'm not exactly John Boy here, and hopefully he goes and he puts a video about this and explains it so much better than I did. But man, oh man, the Bruins caught a significant break on what is a unique play that normally the guy would be out on 10 out of 10 times. Illinois, though, they wouldn't go away. They scored a run in the fourth, scored 2 in the sixth to actually tie this ball game back up at 5. Bruins led 6-5 after a run in the sixth. Top 7 Illinois once again with a game-tying run in the seventh, tying at 6-6. The Bruins with an RBI single in the seventh, and then a Rock-Chalowski bomb to put away the Fighting Illini 8-6 in the eighth inning, and the Bruins survived this game against Illinois, where the Bruins pounded out 10 hits, had 8 runs, did everything they could to keep this game going, with overall getting 7 free passes. Illinois, though, Illinois walked 5. UCLA walked 9. Of their 9 pitchers that they used in a 9-inning game, on average, each pitcher walked 1. Well, some of this was because of Ian May's control issues in the first couple of innings. He walked 3. UCLA also hit 2 batters. So the 9 walks with 2 hit batters were 11 free passes. That is dismal. Illinois had 7 hits. So overall, the Bruins were working around Illinois base runners in traffic all game long. A little bit of a controversial call in their favor. And with the tiebreaker rule favoring the second-seeded Bruins, who only needed to win 1 game, they found themselves now in Omaha. They're playing at the same place they're going to play the Men's College World Series. They got to win. Rock-Chalowski, obviously not in front of a packed house, with less pressure, less national spotlight, not underneath the lights like it's so beautiful in Omaha when it will be in a few weeks' time. But the Bruins got a dub, and they got their taste of Omaha. One of those like, we want to get back here. We want to do it again, and we don't want to lose here. And we don't like that taste. We like the taste of it. We like this field, which is one of the top baseball fields I've ever been to. If you have a chance, if the Bruins get to Omaha, absolutely go. Maybe not necessarily during the Big Ten tournament, because that's just not the same. It is not the same. But if they're in Omaha, it is one of the best events you could ever go to, clearly. So the Bruins survived. They beat Illinois. They played Michigan. Cool. And while if they win that game, they'll get their 41st win and not hurt their RPI too much. They win, they sweep this tournament, they could potentially, not likely, potentially move themselves up into a top 10 spot in the national seeding and a better chance at hosting a super, barring an upset in the first weekend of NCAA tournament play. For now, the Bruins are hovering on the edge of hosting or being bumped out. A loss to Michigan and a loss in the semifinal round could be grounds for making them a 16 seed, a 15 seed, dare I say, screwing them over and making sure that they're not a host. I don't think that would be the case, because a UCLA host would mean there's 3 West Coast hosts and not 4, or not 2, excuse me. But they just can't shoot themselves in the foot. Michigan game doesn't mean much for an 8 a.m. Pacific time start against the Michigan Wolverines, which means it's 10 a.m. local time, earliest game of the day. But then they got a day off, a game they don't have to win against Michigan, and all they have to do is win 2 more games, single elimination, semifinal, final. You go 3-1, your Big Ten tournament champs, hopefully against resume-building clubs, and the Bruins turn themselves into a team to be reckoned with heading into the NCAA tournament. Now, if you look at their analytics and the numbers, and you see the quad 1s, the quad 2s, the quad 3s, which I think is a little tougher to discuss in baseball because midweek games and weekend games aren't the same like a random game on a Tuesday in the college basketball schedule. Bruins have beat up against pretty bad competition, and they got a couple of wins against some good competition. Their pitching is somewhat of a mess, but they have the bats and hopefully the youth and the talent to push themselves at least to a super. And for now, we enjoy the rest of their Big Ten tournament run, and I say go watch it. Go watch it until we get to wait for the UCLA softball team, who we'll talk about in the next episode in their super regional run to Columbia. And when they play South Carolina, that'll be fun. We'll detail it in the next episode. Hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA, fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.